offspring cannot be unpleasing to the eye, dear boy. Just before the Kimberleys departed England, Mistress Kimberly discovered that she was enceinte. Your father and Robert Kimberly drew up a marriage contract between their children then. Of course it was not known if the child Mistress Kimberly was to bear would be a son or a daughter, but it was decided between the two men that Robert's first daughter, whenever she was born, would be your wife. You will see that the girl's name is in your father's hand, and not in the hand of the rest of the document. 2 years after the daughter was born, young Mistress Kimberly died in childbirth with a son. Charlotte Kimberly became her father's heiress, for although he eventually remarried, there were no other children of his body. Your parents and sister were drowned shortly afterward, and the entire matter was forgotten until just before your grandfather's death. It was he who reminded me of the marriage contract and asked that I see you fulfill your obligation. You can really have no strong or reasonable objection, Valerian, as your heart is not engaged elsewhere." "No," he reluctantly admitted. Then he said, "You mentioned that we might be distantly related, Grandmamma. How?" "As I remember the tale," the Dowager Duchess began, "and I should have to consult the family Bible, dear boy, to be entirely accurate, but this is what I recall. The first Duke of Farminster was created so by King Charles upon his restoration. Your ancestor had grown up with the king and gone into exile with him. They were bound by their friendship, loyalty, and by the curious coincidence of having the same birth date. The Earl of Farminster, who became the first Duke, had a younger brother who remained behind in England to protect the estates, and 2 younger sisters. These young women were married, the eldest to a Kimberly, and the younger to a Meredith. Both men were royalists who remained in England working for the king's restoration. When it came, your ancestor saw that his brothers-in-law were rewarded. The island of St. Timothy was given to them by the king, and they emigrated to become sugar planters. The last Kimberly, Robert, now I remember, married the last Meredith, Emily. It is their daughter, the heiress, who will be your wife." "But Emily Kimberly is dead, and Robert remarried," the Duke said. "What else do you know, Grandmamma?" "Naught, dear boy. The rest you shall learn yourself when you reach St. Timothy." "The girl might be dead," the Duke suggested hopefully. "We would have been notified," the Dowager countered. "Not necessarily," the Duke replied. "After all, this alliance was almost forgotten but that grandfather remembered it before he died." "That is true," his grandmother agreed. "The unimportant, albeit wealthy daughter of a colonial planter might be forgotten by a duke, but that same girl's family would hardly forget that their child was promised to that same duke, and one day to be a duchess. No, Valerian, you cannot escape your fate. You will sail on the Royal George from Plymouth in 3 weeks' time for St. Timothy. You are expected." How did my father meet Robert Kimberly? The Duke wondered. Certainly the families did not keep up their contact over the years. "To a certain degree they did," the Dowager said, surprising him. "But Robert Kimberly came to Oxford, which is where he met your father first. They shared quarters for 2 years before Kimberly returned to his island home to marry his first wife, Caroline Meredith. There were no offspring from that marriage, and after her death Robert wed the younger Meredith's daughter, Emily, who bore him his daughter, and died with their son. The third wife I know nothing about." The Dowager patted her grandson's arm comfortingly. "Now, cease your fretting, dear boy. You do not have to remain on St. Timothy any longer than it takes to marry the girl. Assure her family she will have a wonderful life as your duchess, and return to England to settle."